Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey now, today we're going to take a look at this massively heavy box. Psych, just kidding, I took all the stuff out before I started the video, so it's pretty light. This is Dawn, Rise of the Occulites from Eagle-Gryphon Games and Darwin Games. And I'm going to give you a small disclaimer up front, and that is that I reviewed a prototype version of this game back when it was still being funded on Kickstarter. And you could tell that was a while ago because I do not do any prototype reviews anymore, so please don't ask. But I did review it, and as I remember it, I haven't watched it because I wanted to watch it again because I wanted to come to this review fresh, but as I remember, I liked it quite a bit. I thought it was very enjoyable. But this review is going to be my final opinion on the game of the final published version. So what is Dawn, Rise of the Occulites if you're not familiar with it? The easiest way to describe it is a miniature skirmish game, but that doesn't really cover it. That just explains the basic core gameplay. The theme of the game is that there are these tribes of primitive creatures called Occulites that are constantly warring with each other, or skirmishing with each other, if you will. They're usually fighting over these sun gems, which are like these things that are going to keep them warm during the great dark that's on the horizon. But it doesn't necessarily have to be just about that. Sometimes they just like to fight each other. The point is, there's a lot of different scenarios in this game. You can make up your own scenario if you want, or you can just do their introductory scenario. But there's a bevy of other ones that you can pick from and have different terrain layouts. The game comes with terrain, and you can mix it all up. The different tribes have different special abilities, and there's 2 tribes in the main box, but you can get expansions with other ones. And you can just customize the game in a lot of different ways, or do a campaign mode where your decisions and the state of your tribe carry over from game to game. Now, we're going to get into the overview, but I want to give a couple of other caveats. One is that there's no way for me to cover everything that comes in this box or in the rule book / scenario book. There's just no way. So I'm going to give you a taste of one of the scenarios that will give you a good idea of how the game plays, how all the main mechanisms work. I'll show off some of the figures and the pieces just to give you a good idea of all what's in the box. Also, speaking of the figures, I have the painted set of Dawn, Rise of the Occulites. There's 2 different sets, painted and unpainted. Mine is the painted set as well as the expansions that I have. Those are also painted. So just keep that in mind if you're interested in the game, that there's one or the other and there is a difference in price. And I'll talk about that more in my final thoughts. So let's get to the overview. Alright, I'm going to try to give you a brief overview of Dawn, Rise of the Occulites. And I say brief because there is a lot to this game, or there could be a lot. The game is very modular. You can have it be as simple as you want it to be, just using the core rules, or you can make it as complicated as you want, even doing a full campaign mode. That is entirely up to you. Now, you notice that I can't even fit everything on camera here. This board is enormous, so I'll just kind of scope out the different areas of the board to show you. Over here, we have some of the Occulites lined up, one of the teams over along the edge of the board. There's some of the dice that player is going to be using. Then, now the main board is just like this plain area here. These other tiles that I have here are the modular aspects that I mentioned, where depending on the scenario and how you want to play, you can put different tiles out. In fact, at the start of a scenario, some of the tiles will be required, like in this one I'm doing, I believe it's scenario 3, which involves taking over this ridge. So this is always going to be in the center, but the other players get to choose which tiles they want to place out in order. And you can play certain scenarios with up to 4 players. It's up to you, but most of them are kind of meant for 2 players. And here is another team of Occulites over here in front of me. They always go along the edges of the board. And then down here, your team is going to have these little character placards, which to show you what team you're on, what every individual unit is, and also their stats. You have attack, awareness, defense, health, and speed. And then underneath their name, like the Hydrus Netter here, you'll have what special abilities they have. In this case, all of the Hydrus Occulite tribe have the Water-Wise ability, which basically just lets them go through water, most water, without any penalty. But the Netter in particular has a net, hence his name, which he can actually use to make a special attack that slows down and prones and incapacitates some of the other Occulites. You also have one character that is always going to be the chief. You always have a chief of your tribe, and the chief's important because they can use these tokens. And there's my bare foot, sorry. These tokens are the tribal tokens. These are special abilities. They can enable the special abilities of the chief. Some of them are just used for more generic actions. So for instance, being able to swap out the special symbols of some cards, use attack cards as defense cards, and vice versa, or to draw more cards, things like that. But you can also use them to activate the chief's special ability. Now over here on the others, this is the character card, by the way, and this will also tell you what your starting stats should be. But over here, assuming you're playing the advanced game, and you probably should, I'll talk about that in my final thoughts a little bit, you have special abilities that every character is going to have. Like I said, they all have the Water-Wise ability, one of them has the Netting ability, and the chief has the Healing Mucus ability, which lets him spend one of his tokens to actually heal himself, which could be very, very important because you want to keep your chief alive as much as possible. Now, I should probably tell you how you win this game, and well, that's actually a loaded question as well, because that's going to be completely different depending on which scenario you choose to use or what homemade scenario you choose to make up on your own. This game comes with a very, very large booklet. It's both a rule book and a campaign booklet. So you have all the beginning rules up here in the front, then you go into advanced rules, and then it tells you about the tribes, and then in the back it gives you all the different scenarios and even a table to use to choose your scenarios randomly. So here's all the different stats that you need to use each scenario, and they'll tell you how you should set it up, including how you should set up the deck of cards as well. And like I said, you could even do it in a campaign mode where all of your decisions and the status of your tribe carries over from scenario to scenario, game to game. So for instance, while some scenarios may have you, let's say, just taking out the other tribe and scaring them away, or perhaps gaining these sun gems, which are an important part of the lore of Dawn, Rise of the Occulites, because they're like kind of precious gems that will keep the tribe healthy and warm during the darkness that is coming. This particular scenario, you and the other player are vying for control of this ridge in the center of the board, trying to get as many of your Occulites onto that ridge as possible before the limited amount of rounds run out. And you'll use this tracker over here to keep track of rounds, or to keep track of anything that the game tells you to keep track of. It's kind of all-purpose in that regard. Now, this is the natural selection deck, and this is kind of the impetus for keeping the game going. This is what you're going to use to keep track of, to use all of the different actions you want to do during the course of the game. Attacking, defending yourself, activating your units, moving, using special abilities. Most of what you can do in the game comes from this deck, the natural selection deck. Now actually, before I go any further in explaining the natural selection deck and how a lot of the basic game mechanisms work, I figure I should probably show you the miniatures a little bit more before we get started, just to show you, because this is one of the main reasons actually to get the game, and they're very highly detailed, and there's a lot of different variety amongst them. So let me get as close in there as possible and as focused as possible with the limitations of my camera, just to show you. So what's interesting about these is not just that there are different tribes that have their own colors and sort of features about them, but even within the same tribe, they all have different sculpts, which is very, very interesting. And most games would not do that. You just have like a bunch of generic soldiers that all look the same. They kind of went that extra mile in this game, and I think this is the chief for the Hydrus tribe. So just to show you some examples, let me show you the guy with the net, the netter, as it were. And the other tribe that comes in this box, whose name escapes me at the moment, forgive me for that, the Pilatus tribe, that's what it is. There's now riding on top of him is one of the, let me focus that a bit more, is one of the Luftals. See how cute, that kind of cute little creature that's sitting on him? That's actually, you can actually recruit Luftals during the course of the game. And if you're using like advanced rules, and in fact with, I don't think you can do it out of the base box, but with further rules coming down the pipeline, you can even play as the Luftals as their own tribe. So let me show you a couple of their little miniatures, because they are really, really tiny, but also very detailed despite their size. And again, these are kind of the same, but there's different sculpts for each of them, and they have their own chief as well. Now, this my copy of the game came with the expansions, which are sold separately and can also come painted. And by the way, I said this in my intro, but just let me clarify that there's either painted or unpainted sets of Dawn, so you have to make sure which one you're getting. But here's the, I believe this is the Nimbus tribe. They have like little wings. They have like wing-like abilities, and they all come with their own character stat boards, just like the Hydrus tribe did. Here is an example of the Ignis tribe, who have sort of lava-based bodies, and see they have like an obsidian sword, which is pretty cool. And here is the Florus, which, despite the fact that they're kind of like flower-based, are supposed to be like the most warlike of the different tribes of Occulites. So see how he's got like a mace. So it's just very interesting that all the tribes are, they're not just color swapped or palette swapped. They all have their own different, sculpts and different details. This one is really creepy and it's got a big corn stalk, I guess, or a pussy willow. I don't know what that's supposed to be, but it's kind of creepy and cool. And there's also more terrain than what I have out there right now. I won't show you every single bit of that, but you just have a lot of different options for different terrain, especially when you have the expansion sets, which all add more and more of that stuff themed to the particular tribe that you're getting. So there's 3 other expansion sets, just to clarify. So now let me show you some of these natural selection cards, just to give you a taste of what those are like. Now, first off, let me show you the event and sun gem cards, because these cards, you're actually going to have a variable amount of them depending on the scenario. You may not use them at all, but most scenarios will tell you a certain amount of these to put into the deck to shuffle in there before you begin the game. And event cards are kind of generic. They are completely dependent on what the scenario is. So for instance, in this scenario, the ridge scenario, whenever one of these is drawn, it represents a storm that is coming that is worsening. And whenever an event card is drawn, one of the Occulites that is on the ridge, every Occulite that's on the ridge has to roll a d10, and whoever gets the highest on their d10, by the way, low numbers are good in this game, so whoever gets the highest on a d10 is going to get struck by lightning and removed from the scenario. So that's bad. But also every other Occulite is going to have their speed reduced because of wind and rain pushing them back. Now, Sun Gems, this one in particular, and how this actually works is that when it's revealed, your opponent puts a Sun Gem anywhere within 6 spaces of you, closer to you than to him. And the Sun Gems, as I kind of showed you before, are important to the lore of the Occulites, but they're also potentially victory points at the end of the scenario if you're keeping track of those from campaign to campaign. If you're just doing this as a one-shot, then you can keep track of that, but it's really more about getting onto the ridge as much as possible. But like I said, some scenarios put an incredibly high importance on Sun Gems, and they're sort of the whole point of the game. Now, here's one of the standard cards in the natural selection deck. This one happens to be called Precise Attack. And there's 4 major things that you're looking for on one of these cards. First, you're going to look at this sort of stat bar here, and there's 3 different numbers. The first number here, it's kind of hard to tell with my camera, I apologize, but that is an Occulite in the background of that number. And what that represents is if you play this card during your turn for activation, you are going to activate that many of Occulites on your tribe. You get to move 3 of your pieces. And they're different varying numbers. It's not always going to be 3. That one's 4, that one's 2, you know. So you have different cards that give you different activations. And you have to determine how many you need to activate on your turn in order to do well. The second number here is attack. So if you were to use this card for attack, that's the stat that you're looking at. And of course, the last one is defense. It's kind of a shield back there. So if you use this for defense, it's much better. You're actually it's better for you to use it that way because you get a bigger number. But then again, you may need it to use for attack. It's entirely up to you. The fourth important thing, obviously, is the ability underneath those. This one in particular says, when attacking, you roll 2 additional dice for this combat only. But remember, if you use it for the ability, you're ignoring its use as anything else, unless another thing you can do is spend one of your tribal tokens of the chief in order to do that, to have a card that you already committed to one of these other stats be used for a special ability. And I'll just show you some other examples here. This is the heal card, and its special ability is that when you activate one of your figures, you can take an immediate awareness test with it. If you are successful, you may heal up to 2 lost health from that figure. I'll get to tests in a minute. Now, this has a different type of stat here. This is a boost card. You can play these cards during a combat in order to add that number to whatever you're trying to do, whether it's attack or defend. So basically, the way that combat works is that each player is, I guess we'll just dive into this here. So here's basically how combat's going to work. Each player is going to lock in a card from their hand face down, representing either attack or what the number that they want to attack or defend with, depending on what side that they're on. Then when they've locked them in, they're going to flip over. Now, what the attack and defense values mean is the number of dice you're going to get to roll after combat is finished, and then you're going to add up successes, and we'll get back to that in a second. But once primary cards have been revealed, each player has the chance to play another card from their hand as a boost. Now, that is the boost number that I showed you before, and you can play up to 1 regular boost and 1, well, I guess I'll call it irregular boost, which is using a normal card as a boost. So for instance, let me try and come up with an example here. How that's going to work is, let's say that I'm the defender here, and I have a 10 in defense. I can either play another card as a boost that has let's say I have if I had another 10 defense card in my hands, I can play that as a boost because the number matches up to my original defense total, and that's going to add 2 to my total. I'm not adding 10 dice, I'm adding 2. But if I play one that's not the same number, so let's say attack of 10 is the same number as my defense of 10, that just adds 1. I know that's a little tricky, but essentially what you're doing is matching up numbers, and if you can match up the same stat number, like defense 10 to defense 10, that gives you a 2. If it's different, then it's going to be 1. You can also just play a card down as a bluff. If you don't really have a matching number, you can just say, whoa, I'm going to put another card down, just to make your opponent kind of intimidated, and then say, well, I'm going to lose this anyway, so I'm not going to waste my card. At least that's what you would hope would happen. But then once you've revealed all the stuff, then you're just going to add up all your numbers and roll your dice. Now, how you determine successes in this game is the lower the number, the better. You're going to be looking at the figure that is attacking or defending. You're going to look at either their attack or defense, and you need your dice to come up as either equal to or less than the numbers, than that stat. So for instance, my attack was a 4, which it actually is in this case, or let's say I'm the defender. If my defense is a 4, which it is in this case, then I need to roll all the dice that I have coming to me and hope that I get anywhere from 0 to 4. So on this game, on D10s, zeros are actually zeros, and that's actually an automatic success. You can't do better than that. And then you just need to hope that you have more successes than your opponent. If not, then bad things are going to happen. So for instance, if there are more attack dice than defense dice that are successes, then the defense is going to lose 1 health. But if there's twice as many attack dice as defense dice, then you lose 2 health, and it just gets worse and worse. But if there's 4 times as many, it's just instant death. If you're the defender, really the only reward that you get most of the time is just you don't die. Although if you get twice the amount of defense dice, then you can at least make the attacker lose a health. So that's a little bit of compensation. And of course, health is another one of the stats here. So if you ever reach your health limit, in other words, you run out of health, then that figure is dead and is out of the scenario. So I jumped a little bit ahead here, but the combat is one of the most important parts of the game, so that's okay. I just want to give you a taste of what that's like. But how this is going to work is that you're going to decide who's going to go first at the start of the game by rolling dice, and of course, lower number going first. And then you're going to begin, and the first thing you do is play a card, like I said, just to determine how many Occulites you're going to activate. Now, if you can't, or you don't want to for some reason, I think it's optional, you can let nature take its course. In this game, whenever you decide to let nature take its course, you're taking a blind draw off the top of the deck, flipping it, and hoping that it works out for you. Because I think on every natural selection card other than events and sun gems, there is an activation symbol. There may not be attack, there may not be defense, but there is activation. And that will tell you how many you get to activate. But if you want it to be deterministic and have control over your fate, you definitely want to play a card from your hand if you can. Now, when you determine how many figures you're actually going to activate, you activate them one at a time, and you have to complete the entire activation of one figure before you move on to another. And the amount of actions that one single finger gets is equal to your awareness stat. You're probably wondering what that was for. Maybe not. So you determine how many actions that figure has, and then you can you determine what you want to do with it. So there's a lot of different actions you can take. Some of the basic ones would be moving, in which case you're just going to move your speed, however many hexes that is. This is a hex-based game. And you can double up on the same action if you want, so long as you actually have the actions available from your awareness. We already talked about attack. That is a different type of action you can take. You can do the ready action, which is kind of like letting nature take its course, but you aren't forced to play the card that you take from letting nature take its course. You can also do the stand-up action if something, like for instance the netter, forces your character to stand up. Let's just say they've been moving out for a while, so it looks more dynamic. If you are forced to become prone for whatever reason, you can use an action just to stand up, essentially. You have to waste an action, but at least you're back up and you're not going to be taking any penalties. And by the way, yes, due to the dynamic nature of the game, the terrain does impede you in certain ways. Like I mentioned, for instance, the Hydrus doesn't have any problem moving through water, but the other tribes wouldn't be quite so lucky. And also, just moving up onto the ridge requires a test, because you have to climb up on top of it. Even the tribe that has wings still has to do that. And of the general actions you can take, the last one is simply to dump cards from your hand and draw back up to 7. So I'll go ahead and leave it there, because there's a lot more I could talk about as far as the different scenario requirements, and there's tons of different tokens that come in the game. There's different tokens that are explicitly used just for certain scenarios. Like I said, well, you know what? The last thing I will explain, because this is kind of cool. Over here on the side of the board, it's kind of easy to miss, but this is the rebirth track. And this is an interesting part of the game, because as your Occulites die, you're going to be wondering, like, well, dang, how am I ever going to get them back? So a couple of things. First off, I just messed up the name. It's the Reborn track, not the Rebirth track. But you're only ever going to be able to use this if the home cave tile for your particular, for the Occulites is actually on the board. And if that's the case, then the Reborn track comes into play. And this is also will not be able to be used by the Luffle tribe if you're using them. And what this is that when one of your tribe dies, you're going to figure out how many wounds they took past 0, and then add 2 to that number. So let's just say I was killed by, with -1 is basically what I have, plus 2, and then I'm there on the Reborn track. And as rounds go by, I move further up the Reborn track to essentially being reborn. Now, again, this is going to happen if the home cave is in play, and your reborn character is going to, or Occulite is going to come back weaker than before. And if it doesn't happen before the end of the game, then they don't come back during that game. They're going to have to wait and come back into the next game if you're doing a scenario-driven, campaign mode, and they're still weakened at that point as well. But I thought it was an interesting way to get characters back into the game so that death may not necessarily be permanent. And there's a lot of other things I could talk about. I could talk about the some of the advanced actions that you have, sneaking and hiding and all that, but hopefully that gives you a general taste of what Dawn Rise of the Occulites is like. So let's go ahead and get to my final thoughts. Alright, so most people who know about Dawn probably know that there's one major question that needs to be answered regarding it, but I'm going to address that 800-pound gorilla when we get to my end of my final thoughts. I just want to talk about the game itself and what you get out of the box. And first off, component-wise, obviously we'll start with that. It's great. It's really, really high quality components. All the cardboard is nice and thick and looks good. The board is huge, which obviously it's inconvenient when you're trying to put it all on camera. And I know that some people don't like really big boards, but I like it. I think it looks fantastic. The miniatures, of course, that's the main selling point of the game. And those look good too. They're really high quality. And, for the painted set, I think painted or unpainted, they look good, but the painted set, I'm not an expert on painting. I know that some miniatures gamers, like hardcore miniatures gamers, don't like it when sets are pre-painted. They want to do it themselves. They think they can do a better job, and that's fine. I think the painted set for this looks good. I think it looks really high quality. I can't tell the difference between that and anything else. I just think it looks decent. And I would say the only thing to worry about with the miniatures for this game, as well as the artwork for the game, is that the Occulites are very weird. They're very, very odd looking. And I know that some of the people that I played with and some of the people that just saw the game walking by as I played it with other people were like, wow, those are really bizarre looking and not necessarily in a good way. I personally get sick of seeing the same fantasy warriors over and over again, and I appreciate that they were going for something different together with the story of the Occulites as well. And there is a lot of theme to be had if you go through the book and through the scenarios, so that's cool too. So I like that they're weird eye stalk creatures, but not everyone's going to. That's just the way it is. And all the components are just really good and really cool looking. It probably would have been better to have the tiles be double-sided to even get more bang for your buck out of them. But the game comes with a lot of tiles, so you're not going to be wanting for different setups on the board. And speaking of that, that's one of the other really cool things about the game is that there's so many scenarios to go through, and then you can make up your own. So the game has a lot of longevity just by mere virtue of different gameplay goals and different setups and different things that you can do with the board and manipulate it with the other players. You're always working in tandem the way that you choose terrain depending on the scenario. So that's pretty cool. And also, while the game is a two-player game, you can't you can play it with other players. Without a doubt, the best thing about Dawn's mechanisms is the card system. And I do remember distinctly saying this in my original review, and I stand by that now. Especially since as time has gone by in my life as a board gamer, that sounds like the title of the song, I really enjoy games where a card can be used for multiple different things, and where you have a limited hand of cards and you have many different things that you want to do or have to do, but you have to make hard calls and hard choices with the cards that you have. So it's like, okay, I need to activate as many of the Occulites in my tribe as I possibly can. That's the best thing that I can do, because whatever the scenario is, I got to get to those sun gems. I got to spread out and cut off my opponent and take them out, or whatever it might be. Activating as many Occulites as I can is my best move here, so I need to play a card to do that. But the special ability on this card is really cool, so I'd rather do that instead, maybe, or use it for attack, or use it for defense, or, you know, use it as a boosting card for a whole other card. There's so many different things you can do, and, you know, deciding what to use for what is a big part of the game. Deciding when to use the ability to, the action to redraw, or deciding like, okay, I can't do anything, I'm going to let nature take its course. You have all of these different options, and I just love that. I love, you know, that amount of strategy contained just within that mechanism. And, you know, it's not easy to make those kind of choices. And it just, even though it's a simple thing to learn and pick up on, it just gives the game a much needed depth. There's other cool parts about like the combat as well, the dice rolling system and how you can use the cards and how they interact with that and adding to your rolls, and the whole letting nature take its course thing. So there's a lot of really neat bits and pieces to how the combat works. Not combat, but any kind of check really. But the core gameplay is still pretty basic. You know, you take different actions. Every Occulite has a different amount of actions, and then you move them, attack. I mean, this is the kind of things that you see in a lot of miniature skirmish games, and I think that that's to its benefit, though, because even if you do play with all the advanced rules all at once, it can be a bit overwhelming, but when the core gameplay is pretty simple, that means that you could theoretically play it with anyone, and you can play it at different skill levels as well. Like, if you want to customize your tribe and customize your stats, you can do that, but you don't have to, and the people that you're playing with don't have to either. It's entirely up to you, and then you can just go full bore and do the campaign mode and all of these different things. I like the differing amount of complexity that you can put into the game. That's entirely up to you. You know, if I was going to make a complaint about the gameplay, I don't have any major complaints. I think the game is quite good. I would just say that there are a lot of other games out there that do some of the things that Dawn does in perhaps a more streamlined fashion. And, you know, I don't know, I'm just picking a couple of examples off the top of my head, but games like Arcadia Quest and games like even Descent to a certain degree, even though Descent is very different, being a one versus all game that's sort of made for campaign mode, as far as modular terrain and different goals and, you know, how the players interact and also use, you know, how the Overseer or whatever his name is uses cards, some of those things are very similar. So I do feel like some things I've played in Dawn I've played before, even though that card mechanism is very, very, it feels fresh to me. Like, I haven't seen even other games that use that idea of using a card for multiple things. Doesn't quite feel like the way that Dawn does it, so that's why I give it major props. So overall, this is a good review. I like all the components, I like the theme to a certain degree, although I understand why some people don't, and I like a lot of the mechanisms. But it's not a fantastic game. And there's the rub, because I mentioned in the beginning of my final thoughts that there was something we needed to address, and that is the cost of the game. And I hate to say that because at some point I wish that the two things can be completely separate, right? If a game is good, a game is good. What does it matter what it costs? But it kind of does. I think it is something that needs to be addressed because, you know, value is relative. What's, you know, worth it for you can be completely different than what's worth it to me. If you have a lot of disposable income that you can spend on games, and to you it's like, well, I don't really care what it costs. If it's a good game, I'm going to buy it. And that's great. And then Dawn might be definitely for you. Might be definitely, whatever. On the other hand, it is very expensive. And I'm going to leave it, I don't know the exact cost. You can get it at a lot different retailers, so you can do that research on your own. Google it. But for the cost that it is, I don't know that it's necessarily worth it for what you get. You get a lot of cool components, but you also only get 2 tribes, which means you're going to have to spend even more money on the expansions. And again, if you're going full bore and this is going to be your game that you do on family game nights or with your gaming buddies, and you're going to go through all the campaign mode, that would probably seem more worth it to me, for me. But if you just want a light skirmish game that you kind of pull off the shelf every once in a while, that may not be worth the amount of money that you want to spend on this, especially because of the large amount of shelf space that the box takes up. And that may sound like a frivolous thing, but trust me, it's not. I know this personally. There's only so much space that I have, and I've started jettisoning a lot of games for that reason. You know, what makes practical sense. So I do think that the game is good, and I do think the components are great, but just like with a game like Cthulhu Wars, I don't know that it is worth it at that cost. This was definitely a very ambitious project, and I really appreciate the ambition involved in it and trying to get the designer's dream out there and just make this project the best that they possibly could. But practically speaking, I don't know if it's as much of a success, but definitely a great idea. And if you ever have a chance to try it, definitely try it first. And you might be surprised. You might be surprised at how much you enjoy all the tons and tons of epic stuff that comes in the box. That is Dawn, Rise of the Occulites from Eagle-Gryphon and Darwin Games.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.